It's been a while, hasn't it?
Kept you waiting, huh?
You know, I've been dealing with full-time jobs, so I haven't been able to put too much work into this game. Although that doesn't mean it is completely abandoned. I've been putting in about 3 to 4 hours of work weekly, sometimes more than that, sometimes less. But I am still working on it regardless, so do not think that I'm abandoning this game. I've gone pretty far, and I'm not quitting now, that's for sure. But enough of me yapping. It's time to get to the topic that you clicked on this video for. And arguably, a topic that is the most important in my game. So strap yourself in and get ready for a breakdown of the first component of the king. So who is the king exactly? Well, it is an AI inspired by the director AI from the Left 4 Dead series. And the video I'm currently showing is something I recommend if you're interested in these sorts of subjects. Link is in the description below. To give a quick intro to the King AI, it essentially formats the waves and controls the flow of the waves. This is how the king decides the format of the wave. And I will go into detail for each stage in this graph. Now let's start with the first stage, the Uncontrollable Events stage. This stage is pretty simple, honestly. These are events that the king cannot interfere with. These are all predefined. And one example of an uncontrollable event is the disruptor's appearance, where they show up with a predetermined number. Now for the player style calculation stage, before diving into it, we need to bring up secret stats. What are they exactly? Well, these are stats that every entity with health holds, including you the player of course, and these entities hold predefined values that are in offense, defense, and support. Now I'm not bringing this up for no reason. In fact, it is very related to how to calculate the player's style. In fact, these secret stats will come up again later in the other stages, so you better be remembering this moment. So how we calculate the secret stats is every upgrade you choose to buy, every placeable that you're placing on the battlefield, these hold secret stats, and these determine your playstyle. To give an example of how this works, if the player has an upgrade in damage and a few demo mages on the battlefield, well, damage is considered a very offensive upgrade in relation to secret stats. Demo mages are also considered very offensive in relation to secret stats. Now gather all these factors and calculate them, along with a little bit of sprinkle of math, and voila! You get the player with an aggressive playstyle. Now let's discuss the enemy pool size calculation. This stage determines how many enemies will be chosen in the upcoming wave. And I refer to specific enemies, not the total amount of enemies that will be spawned. For example, we calculate a pool size of 2. You can possibly get a default enemy and a shinobi. Now the king requires some vital variables before it can calculate the pool size, which are stability points, pity points, and safety points. Stability points keep track of how far the player is in their current game session, which is useful for scaling pity points and safety points. Pity points keep track of how poor the player is doing. These points will help the king with not being too harsh on the player. Safety points are pretty much the exact opposite of pity points. The king uses this to provide an extra challenge to the player, but not so much that the player does not feel like they're progressing at all with their growing power. And with those points explained, we can shift back to pool size. So 3 factors are considered here: how far the player is in their session, the difficulty the player selected, and how well or poorly they did. Remember those pity and safety points. And with these factors combined, you get the result of the enemy pool size. Once obtained, we pass this result to the next stage. And now we arrive at the real meat of the king, determining the enemy pool. This stage is split into 2 substages. That's how big this stage is. So let's get into the first substage, which is determining enemy type amount. So basically, a calculation is performed to see how many types of enemies will be in the pool. And what I mean by types are basic and special. And this is pretty straightforward. Basic enemies are just enemies that have no special abilities. Special, well, you know. And there exists a scale where basic enemies are favored at the beginning of the game, but as time goes on, special enemies will become more common. Now we're at the second substage, determining the specific enemies. So, getting the results from the previous substage, we get to calculating the specific enemies. And if you remember, we are going to bring secret stats back for this section. So a player's playstyle, with their secret stats and all, will help the king in determining which enemies to consider more. So to explain this at a high level, to not get too into the weeds, essentially this area is like a game of rock, paper, scissors. And what I mean by that is that it's a game of what counters what. But in this game's case, we're looking at offense, defense, and support. Now, it's not truly the case that the king isn't always looking to counter the player's playstyle, unless you take game difficulty into consideration. And in this case, well, let's dive into the difficulties. So in easy mode, the king will feel less inclined to choose enemies that would counter the player's style. Normal would just be pretty much complete randomness, although there's some factors there that aren't complete randomness, but just to keep it brief, we'll say it's complete randomness. And then if you chose hard difficulty, that means the king will feel more inclined to choose enemies that counter the player. Now, of course, hard mode doesn't mean that the best counter will always be chosen, just that the king is more biased towards enemies that would counter you. Now, for the stage of determining enemy amount, this is going to be a pretty short one. It's essentially the king calculates the amount of enemies that spawn next wave through what is essentially a quadratic formula adding onto itself. Although the formula's been tweaked so that the growth isn't so explosive, and of course difficulty is factored into this. And now we're on to the final stage, which again has 2 substages. Not as lengthy as the other one though. But let's start with the smaller one first. So we have wild cards, and in this case it is an event that occurs at random intervals, so it could be every 3 waves, every 5 waves, so on. And this isn't a complete section actually. Right now it's just adding an extra enemy to the enemy pool, but there are ideas for adding in other events that would spice up the gameplay. Now for the more fleshed out substage, we have the pity card. And this is an extra step of ensuring that the player is not always behind in terms of their amount of resources or how much power they have compared to the difficulty of the next wave. And pity points are utilized for this pity card. So players raking in pity points warrants a pity point reward. What are these exactly? Well, they alleviate some difficulties of the next wave. And an example of a pity point reward would be lowering the total number of enemies that would spawn in the next wave. And that is the king. The king wasn't designed to make the player suffer and stay stressed through the entire game, but rather give a challenging environment while still making it fun. And, this is not the end of the king. There's still some tweaks to make along the way. And as I stated, the wild card substage is still in development. But for the most part, this is the king, the first component. And if you'd allow me, I like to do a little plug on my Patreon. This is just where I do blog posts, and everything is free, so you don't have to worry about paying. Honestly, I should just get my own website. It's better than Patreon, but if anyone has any suggestions for free or very cheap blog websites, leave a comment below. But that is everything for this video. I'm still continuing to improve the game in other aspects, and I'm doing a lot of bug fixing, all that fun stuff. So look forward to the next video where I explain the second component of the king. But first, I gotta, get to implementing that thing, don't I? That's unfortunate.